You may call me Toxo,
said the man who had just fallen from the sky.
because you don't look like you could pronounce my first name.
Toxo was ejected from a space freighter above Outlaw's Inlet, and even that was more information than he was willing to share about the subject.
I don't want to talk about it.
The other residents always had a strong suspicion that he didn't leave by choice. Given that he'd showed up bruised and naked, he was in dire need of clothes, but unfortunately there were none to give. Under the clever guidance of Trout, the wild woman, Eilesh's home had already grown in spades. They'd met a number of new and interesting people, but she had just found Toxo incredibly difficult to deal with.
Well, did you try to talk to him at least?
Brady would ask her.
I tried, but his accent is horrible. I just can't.
She replied, and they left it at that for a while. It was only a few days after Toxo had joined Outlaw's Inlet that Trout was enjoying some well-deserved rest, and a call came over the radio. A decision had to be made.
But obviously I will be getting close before we accept that, yes?
Toxo asked, but of course it was too late.
Damn it!
Both Brady and Eilesh agreed with Trout. Forming and cultivating these friendships with neighboring tribes was the only way that Outlaw's Inlet was going to survive. To his credit, Toxo did his best to help with the rescue. Unfortunately, being under-equipped meant he was overwhelmed with the chinchilla attack. It was at this point when Toxo really began to hit his limit. He didn't know how much more he could handle, and he really didn't have a lot of options. The next morning, he attempted to take out his frustration on Eilesh,
Can you, stop punching me, please?
and that's when Trout decided to get involved. Since Toxo's main complaint had been about clothing, Trout decided the best course of action was to get materials. True to her nature, she picked out some of the most menacing enemies she could find, and she took Toxo with her into the wild. If he was quiet before, he was even quieter now. Toxo never did talk about what had happened that day, but he came back fully clothed. He also began to treat his fellow colonists with a lot more respect. Whether or not that was because he was terrified of Trout, they would never know. Over the following days and weeks, Toxo's efforts made a huge impact on Outlaw's Inlet in setting up some of the foundation that they would need for later. He became an amazing shooter. His efforts with hunting would bring in large amounts of food and allow them to continue working on the colony. One day, in the late summer, a mechanical whirring sound could be heard overhead, and Trout rushed out the door. Before she left, she shot a final glance to Toxo and gave him a silent nod. He immediately followed. It was a mechanoid hive, mindless, soulless automatons with only one thing on their mind: complete destruction of all humanity. Waking one would mean waking them all, and they had way too much firepower. Two allies were visiting that day, but they were overzealous and they decided to open fire.
Exterminate!
Sounded out, along with the whirring of servos and the crunching of gears. When Trout saw the visitor was under attack, she threw herself completely out into the open, exposed. It was Toxo that saved her life that day, gripping her by the shoulder before putting a bullet between a Scyther's eyes. And he gave cover as she rushed in headlong to save the day. They were able to escape with nothing more than cuts and bruises and settled in for the night. The very next morning, another mechanoid hive came down. Toxo scanned over the field of battle and looked at his allies. There was no good cover here, and Brady couldn't afford to be shot. He was the only one with medical experience.
Stay behind me.
Toxo barked to Eilesh as he watched a guest take up a melee position with a shield and looked to Trout, the fearless leader. As the fight started, things went bad almost immediately. Eilesh took a direct and unexpected rocket hit. As she screamed and worked to beat out the flames, a wave of fear overtook Toxo. When he was able to snap to, he looked up just in time to see Trout get shot. As she looked at him, in that moment, he knew what she was planning to do. She was planning to sacrifice herself once again for the colony. And it was also in that very special, singular moment that Toxo completely turned his life around, and he understood the true meaning of heroism. And in that moment, there were more feelings and emotions in his head than there were bullets. Oh, did you want like a moral to the story? Don't wait until it's too late to turn your life around. I guess sometimes it is too late to make a change. I don't know if that's a great moral, but there you go. Make a change now. If you're a jerk, stop it.